Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today's a little different. Today we aren't just looking at a topic. We are stepping directly into a war room. The date is February 15th, 2026. The automotive industry has effectively turned inside out over the last 24 months, and if you are listening to this, chances are you are sitting in an engineering office in Detroit, Stuttgart, or Shanghai, or maybe you are prepping for a high-stakes strategy meeting, wondering how on earth you are going to navigate the next fiscal year. To help you answer that question, we have pulled together a massive stack of reports. I'm talking about deep technical analysis from AVL, strategic outlooks from upstream, regulatory breakdowns from ITK Engineering and UL Solutions, and the hard engineering data from Continental and Electrobit.
It is a formidable stack, and we're talking about, thousands of pages of dense technical and strategic material. And frankly, if you look at the aggregate data, it paints a picture of an industry at a definitive inflection point. We are no longer talking about theoretical risks or what-if scenarios. The data from the 2024 and 2025 landscapes is in, and it's staggering.
Staggering is absolutely the right word. I want to hit our listeners with a headline statistic right out of the gate, just to set the stakes for this conversation. Since 2020, cyber attacks on the automotive sector has surged by 380%.
380.
That is not a typo. That is nearly a quadruple increase in hostile activity in, half a decade?
And it is not just the volume, it is the nature and the sophistication of the attacks. That is what we really need to unpack today. We have moved past the era of the script kiddie or the white hat researcher popping a door lock at a conference to show it can be done. We're seeing a shift to massive scale systemic attacks. We are talking about ransomware that shuts down production lines.
Really? Entire production lines?
Absolutely. We're talking about fleets being bricked remotely. The car is no longer just a vehicle. In 2026, it is a rolling data center, and more importantly, it is a node in critical national infrastructure.
Exactly. So, for this deep dive, we're going to try something a little different. We aren't just going to summarize the news. We're going to role play a bit. Imagine us as your senior strategy consultants. You, the listener, are a senior automotive engineer or a technical lead at a top global OEM or Tier 1 supplier. You've hired us to give you the State of the Union, a McKinsey-style, top-down strategic report on how to survive 2026.
I like that approach. We need to be MECE, here mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. We need to cover the landscape without any gaps. Our mission today is to help you navigate this inflection point. The core theme of our report is the transition from compliance-driven security.
Which is just checking boxes.
Exactly. Just checking boxes to keep the regulators happy. We're moving from that to something we call dynamic resilience.
Dynamic resilience. I like the sound of that. It sounds expensive, though.
It is an investment, certainly, but as we will discuss, the cost of inaction is significantly higher, much higher. So we're going to structure this briefing into three pillars. First, the geopolitical regulatory matrix. The world it's split into very specific zones, Europe, China, and the US, and they do not play by the same rules anymore. Second, the next-gen technical architecture. We have to talk about the shift to zonal architecture, the looming threat of quantum computing, and of course, the role of AI. And third, engineering execution. How do you actually build this stuff without losing your mind? We're talking continuous terra, dynamic SBOMs, and instrumented fuzzing.
Okay, let's start with that big picture then, the strategic landscape. Why have the old models failed? I mean, we have all these regulations. We have ISO 20434, we have UNR and 155. Why are attacks still up 380%?
It comes down to what the Upstream 2025 report identifies as the cyber gap. This is a critical concept for anyone in the C-suite or, in engineering leadership to grasp. There is a fundamental lag between compliance and security. You can pass an audit. You can have your CSMS, your cybersecurity management system certified. You can get your type approval, but that does not mean you are secure against a motivated attacker today. Compliance looks at what happened yesterday. Security needs to look at what is happening right now.
So checking the box doesn't stop the hacker. It's like building a castle wall exactly where the blueprint says, but the enemy has already invented airplanes.
Precisely. That is a perfect analogy. And the financial reality is driving this gap. The market for automotive cybersecurity is exploding. It was valued at about $52.5 billion back in 2024, and it is projected to hit over $314 billion by 2033.
Wow.
That is a massive growth curve. But here is the catch. The threat actors are following the money, too. This isn't just mischief anymore. It's a business model.
You mentioned ransomware earlier. I feel like that's a word we hear in IT, with hospitals or banks. But cars.
It is the #1 financial threat in the automotive sector right now. Look at the CDK global attack. That was a watershed moment. It wasn't a hack on a car's brakes. It was a hack on the dealer management systems.
The software that runs the dealership.
The software that runs the entire business. It cost dealerships nearly $1 billion. $1 billion. It paralyzed sales and service across North America. But now we are seeing that threat vector move closer to the vehicle itself. Imagine a fleet of delivery vans held for ransom. Not the keys, but the digital credentials to start the engine.
Or the charging infrastructure. We saw reports on bricked EVs and V2G vehicle-to-grid attacks. So if I can hack the charger, I can potentially spike the battery management system of the car plugged into it.
Correct. You could destroy the battery. And this brings us to the catalyst of this entire mess. The software-defined vehicle, or SDV. We have transitioned from cars being hardware-defined, where the value was in the engine block and the suspension, to being software-defined. A modern high-end vehicle in 2026 has over 100 million lines of code.
100 million. That's more than a fighter jet. That's more than a desktop operating system.
Yep.
That is a staggering amount of surface area for attack.
And every line of code is a potential vulnerability. The complexity has exploded, but our testing methodologies in many places are still stuck in the hardware era. This is where the financial argument for shift left comes in. We have data from Jones Capers that is absolutely brutal. Fixing a bug in production once the car is on the road costs 640 times more than fixing it during the design phase.
640 times. Let's just pause on that for a second. So if it costs $1,000 to fix in the lab, it's over $500,000 to fix via recall or crisis management later.
That's right.
That destroys margins.
It absolutely destroys them. So when we talk about dynamic resilience, it's not just a security strategy, it is a financial survival strategy. You cannot afford to fix security problems after SOP started production. The ROI of shift left isn't abstract, it's right there on the balance sheet.
Okay, so the stakes are astronomical, the code base is massive, the hackers are greedy. Now let's look at the referee in this game. The regulators. You mentioned the geopolitical regulatory matrix. It feels like it used to be one global market, but now it's fragmented. Let's start with Europe. They've always been the leaders in regulation, right?
Europe is the gold standard for process. That's the key word, process. If you want to sell a car in the EU or in the UK, Japan, or Korea for that matter, you live and die by UN R155 and R156.
Just to refresh everyone quickly, R155 is the cybersecurity management system, and R156 is software updates.
Correct. And the key word there is management system. Europe is process-driven. To get type approval, you don't necessarily have to prove that your car is unhackable because, let's face it, that's impossible. You have to prove that you have a rigorous process to manage risk. You need to show the auditors that you have a CSMS that covers the entire life cycle of the vehicle, which could be 15 years.
15 years.
You need to show traceability from the risk assessment all the way to the line of code and the test result.
And if you don't?
You don't sell cars. Simple as that. We saw this with the Porsche Macan.
Yeah.
A best-selling SUV, incredibly popular. But because its older electronic architecture couldn't meet the new cybersecurity standards, Porsche had to stop selling the internal combustion version in the EU.
Just stop.
Pulled it from the market. That is a massive revenue hit. It's a cautionary tale that sent shockwaves through the boardrooms of every other OEM. It proved that cybersecurity is now, fundamentally, a market access issue.
But Europe didn't stop at R155, did they? There's this new thing, the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act. What's that about?
The CRA is the new layer of complexity. R155 covers cars. But the CRA covers products with digital elements.
That sounds broad.
It is a huge expansion of scope. It covers the aftermarket parts, the dongles you plug in, and crucially, non-road machinery.
So tractors, forestry equipment, construction gear.
Exactly. If you are John Deere or Caterpillar, you are now in the crosshairs in a way you weren't under just automotive regulations. The CRA requires you to manage vulnerabilities for 5 years or the expected product lifetime. And the reporting requirements are intense. You have 24 hours to flag an actively exploited vulnerability.
24 hours.
It's creating what we call audit fatigue. The engineering teams are spending as much time documenting their work for auditors as they are actually securing the vehicle.
It sounds like a paperwork nightmare, but I guess unnecessary one to ensure accountability. Okay, so Europe is all about rigorous process and audits. Let's pivot to the East. China. Is it just a copy-paste of the European rules?
Absolutely not. And this is where many global OEMs are getting burned. If Europe is process-driven, China is test-driven. They are building what we call a tech and data fortress.
A tech and data fortress, I like that. So, interesting distinction. How does that manifest in the engineering requirements?
Well, look at the GB standards, specifically GB 44495 and GB 44496, which are the counterparts to the UN regulations. But China doesn't just want to see your paperwork or your process charts, they want to see physical results. For type approval in China, there is a requirement for specific physical tests, 38 distinct tests, to be precise.
38 tests. So they are actually trying to hack the car.
Yes. They require functional tests and penetration tests on the actual vehicle. They want to see you demonstrate that the car can withstand specific attack vectors. It's much more tangible. You can't just explain your risk management strategy. You have to pass the exam.
So is the difference between submitting a thesis and passing a lab practical?
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. But the bigger challenge in China, the real elephant in the room, is data sovereignty. The PIPL, the Personal Information Protection Law, and the Automotive Data Security Regulations are incredibly strict. Critical data cannot leave China.
So if I'm a German automaker and I want to analyze performance data from my fleet in Shanghai to improve my algorithms back in Munich,
You can't, not directly. You have to build a local data center. You have to process that data within China's borders. This is forcing OEMs to adopt what we call 150% architecture.
150% architecture, that sounds incredibly inefficient.
It is the definition of inefficiency, but it is the cost of doing business. Think of it this way. You have your 100% global base architecture, the platform you sell in the US and Europe. But to sell in China, you need to add another 50% of specific hardware and software just to meet the local compliance and data residency requirements.
So you're maintaining two parallel tech stacks.
You are. Effectively, yes. It completely destroys the economies of scale that global platforms were supposed to provide.
That is a strategic nightmare. You're doubling your engineering overhead just to get access to the market. Okay, so that's the fortress in the East. What about the West? What is happening in the USA?
The USA is building what we're calling a geopolitical wall. They don't have a mandatory type approval system like the EU or China yet. There is no US R155.
Yeah.
They rely on self-certification and voluntary standards like the Auto ISAC best practices. But the Department of Commerce has stepped in with a sledgehammer.
This is the supply chain ban, right?
Correct. The 2025-2026 bans on Chinese and Russian hardware and software in connected vehicles, this is massive. It frames cybersecurity not as a consumer safety issue, but as a national security issue.
So they were basically saying, we don't trust the code if it was written in Beijing.
That's the long and short of it. It's a clean network approach. The implication is that by 2027 for software and 2030 for hardware, supply chains must be completely de-risked. If you are an OEM sourcing a cheap T-box, a telematics box, from a Chinese supplier, you have to rip that out and find a compliant source, likely at a much higher cost.
So you end up with a bifurcated supply chain.
Exactly. You might have one supply chain for your China operations and a completely separate, clean supply chain for North America.
This is the balkanization of the auto industry. 3 regions, 3 completely different sets of rules. It sounds like the era of the true world car is dead.
The world car concept is certainly on life support. The strategy now has to be global core, regional edge. You build a central kernel that is common, but the connectivity, the data handling, and the security modules have to be modular enough to swap out based on where the car is being sold.
Okay, let's move from the map to the blueprint. We've talked about the regulations. Now let's talk about the machine itself. Section 3, technical architecture. If we are going to survive this hostile environment, we can't keep building cars the way we did in 2015. What is the fundamental shift?
The shift is from distributed architecture to zonal architecture. This is the foundation of the next decade of vehicle design.
Unpack that for us. What does that mean?
In the old days, and by old days I mean 5 years ago, a car had 100 or more ECUs, electronic control units. There was a box for the windows, a box for the engine, a box for the radio. It was a mess of wiring. Distributed, it was a nightmare to secure because the attack surface was everywhere.
It's like a house where every single light bulb has its own fuse box.
That's a good analogy, a very good one. Zonal architecture cleans this up. You move to a few high-performance computers, HPCs, that act as the brains, and then you have zone controllers based on physical location, left front zone, right rear zone, and so on.
So the left front zone controller would handle the headlight, the window, the tire pressure sensor, everything on that corner, regardless of what they do.
Exactly. It simplifies the wiring harness, which saves weight and money. But from a security perspective, the real benefit is microsegmentation.
Microsegmentation. That sounds like something from a spy movie.
It's standard IT security, but now we're applying it to cars. It means we can put firewalls between the zones. In the old distributed model, If you hacked the infotainment system, you might be able to jump onto the CAN bus and send a message to the brakes.
Which is terrifying.
Right. In a zonal architecture, the infotainment is in a separate virtual container on the HPC. If it gets hacked, the brakes function is in a completely different secure zone. We can quarantine the infection.
That sounds great. But doesn't concentrating everything into one or two big computers create a giant target, a single point of failure?
It does. It absolutely does. The HPC becomes a single point of failure. If that brain goes down, the car's a brick. That is why the internal security of that HPC is the holy grail of automotive engineering right now. And that brings us to hardware trust.
Okay, this is the HSM versus T debate. We see this in the consultancy reports all the time. Break it down for us.
Okay. Ideally, you want an HSM, a hardware security module. Think of this as a physical vault, a safe welded onto the chip. It stores your digital keys. It is physically separate. It is very, very hard to crack. This is essential for what we call the root of trust.
Okay, the vault and the T.
The T, trusted execution environment, is more like a VIP section in a nightclub. It's part of the main processor, but it's roped off. Only approved, vetted apps can run there. It's secure, but not as physically secure as the separate vault of an HSM. The strategic advice for 2026 is use the HSM for your most critical secrets, your keys, and your boot process. Use the T for running sensitive applications like your secure diagnostic tools or in-car payment apps. You really need both to build a robust defense in-depth strategy.
Okay, so we have the vault, which is the HSM, and the VIP room, the T. But
Yeah.
there is a storm cloud on the horizon that threatens to blow the whole building down. Post-quantum cryptography, PQC.
This is the time bomb. And I cannot stress enough how urgent this is. Many engineers I talk to think this is science fiction, but it is an immediate engineering problem.
But wait, quantum computers that can actually crack modern encryption, aren't those still a decade away, like 2035 or something?
The computers might be a decade away, but the threat is happening today, right now. It's called harvest now, decrypt later.
That sounds terrifying. What does it mean?
It is. Hackers, and more importantly, state-sponsored actors, are scraping encrypted data traffic right now. Your software updates, your diagnostic logs, all of it. They can't read it yet, but they are storing it on massive servers. They're waiting for the day a quantum computer comes online, estimates say the early 2030s, that can shatter our current RSA and ECC encryption.
And since a car built in 2026 will still be on the road in 2036.
Exactly. You see the problem. If that car's software update keys are harvested today in 2036, a hacker could use a quantum computer to forge a software update. They could push malicious firmware to a 10-year-old car, and the car would accept it as genuine. We are already out of time.
So what's the fix? What do we do?
We have to migrate to the new NIST standards. NIST finalized these recently. We are talking about algorithms with names like ML-Chem, also known as Kyber for key encapsulation, and ML-DSA, or dilithium, for digital signatures.
Kyber and dilithium. Sounds like Star Trek.
It does, but the engineering reality is less sci-fi and more of a headache. The problem with these post-quantum keys is that they are huge. A standard RSA key is small, efficient. A dilithium signature is massive in comparison.
How massive are we talking?
Big enough to clog up the CAN bus. If you try to send these massive keys over a standard vehicle network, you create latency. Your boot time slows down. Your flash time for an OTA update triples. It forces a complete rethink of how we handle data transmission within the vehicle itself.
So we need bigger pipes, more bandwidth inside the car.
We need crypto agility. We need hardware that has enough memory and processing power reserved today to handle these big keys tomorrow. If you max out your chip's memory in 2026 with current encryption, you cannot update it to PQC later. You have effectively bricked the car's security future. The consultant's recommendation here is clear. Over-provision your hardware. Leave headroom for PQC.
That's a tough sell to the purchasing department. Hey, buy these more expensive chips for a threat that might hit in 10 years.
It is a very tough sell. But the alternative is a recall of every single vehicle in 2032. That is the ROI argument. A few cents on a chip now saves billions in liability later.
Got it. Now let's talk about the defense that runs on top of this architecture, AI. We touched on it, but how is AI changing the game in the vehicle SOC, the Security Operations Center?
The biggest problem in a VSOC right now is alert fatigue. A modern car generates terabytes of data. If you have a fleet of 1 million cars, you are getting billions of signals. Is that weird voltage spike a hack, or is it just a faulty throttle sensor? How do you tell the difference?
Right. If the analysts have to check every single spike, they'll quit within a week.
Exactly. So we use AI and digital twins to solve this. This is what we call the VSOC 3.0 model. We use contextual detection.
Give me an example of context. How does that work?
Okay, so imagine the VSOC sees a command, open trunk. On its own, that's a normal command. Happens all the time. But let's look at the digital twin for context. The digital twin shows the car is currently moving at 100 kilometers per hour on a highway.
Okay, opening the trunk at 100 kph is definitely not normal. That's a huge red flag.
Right. A simple rule-based system might miss that, but a contextual AI sees speed open 100, command, open trunk, result, BLOCK. It's an anomaly. It filters out the noise and highlights the real threats. It understands the physics of the vehicle, not just the code.
And generative AI, are we using LLMs to chat with a car?
In a way, yes. We are using LLMs to query the logs. Instead of writing complex SQL queries, an analyst can just ask the AI in plain English, show me all cars in the Seattle area that had a failed login attempt followed by a trunk open command in the last 24 hours.
And it just finds them.
It parses the unstructured logs, finds the pattern, and can even generate an incident playbook. Here is the recommended response. Isolate these 3 vehicles and push a patch. It accelerates the response time from days to minutes.
That is incredible. So we have the map, which is the regulations. We have the machine, zonal, plus PQC. Now, Section 4, engineering execution. This is the consultant's playbook. How do we actually do the work?
This is where the rubber meets the road. Strategy is great, but execution eats strategy for breakfast. The first pillar of execution is continuous TARA.
CARA stands for Threat Analysis and Risk Assessment. Traditionally, this was a massive Excel spreadsheet you filled out at the beginning of the project and then, never looked at again, right?
Exactly. The static TARA. It is dead. It has to be, because a car isn't static anymore. We release software updates every month. New vulnerabilities, CVEs, are discovered every single day.
So how do we make it continuous?
We move from Excel to model-based systems engineering. We use tools like those from AVL or Cybellum. These tools create a digital model of the car's risk profile.
How does that work in practice? What happens on a normal Tuesday?
Okay, imagine a new vulnerability is published in the NVD, the National Vulnerability Database. Let's say it's a flaw in a specific Bluetooth stack. The automated system sees this new CVE. It instantly checks the SBOM, the software bill of materials of your entire fleet. It sees that your Model X, year 2026, uses that exact Bluetooth stack.
So it knows we are vulnerable instantly.
It goes a step further. It maps that vulnerability to the Terra. It says, originally, we thought the risk from Bluetooth was low, but this new exploit kit makes it critical. It automatically recalculates the risk score. It alerts the product team and the PSIRT, the Product Security Incident Response team, simultaneously.
So the product team who builds it and the PSRT who fixes it are looking at the exact same data in real time.
Precisely. No silos. AVL calls this bridging the gap between development and operations. It turns risk management from a periodic audit into a real-time dashboard.
That leads right into the next point. Instrumented fuzzing. We know fuzzing is throwing random data at a system to see if it breaks, but what makes it instrumented?
Regular fuzzing is black box. You throw junk at the input and see if the system crashes. It's effective, but it can be slow. You don't know why it crashed. Instrumented fuzzing means we put probes, little software sensors inside the code while we test it. We can see the code coverage.
So we can see, oh, when I sent this weird data packet, it went down this specific logic path and overflowed this specific buffer.
Exactly. It's white box testing you see inside. And the real consultant's tip here is to do this via virtualization. Do not wait for the physical ECU hardware to show up.
Because chip shortages happen, and hardware prototypes are super expensive and hard to get.
Right. We run virtual ECUs in the cloud. We spin up 1,000 virtual instances of the braking controller in an AWS server farm. We fuzz them 247 in the CI/CD pipeline. By the time the physical chip arrives from the supplier, we have already found and fixed 90% of the bugs. This is the ultimate shift left.
That must save months of development time.
Months. And millions of dollars. Remember that 640x cost stat? This is how you avoid that.
Next up on the playbook, the SBOM, the software bill of materials. You called it the single source of truth.
If you don't know what is in your car, you can't protect it. It's that simple. A modern car has thousands of software libraries, open source, commercial, proprietary stuff from suppliers. The SBOM is the ingredients list.
So the ingredients change with every software update.
That is why it must be a dynamic SBOM. It has to track versions, licenses, and vulnerabilities in real time. The LGVS case study is fascinating here. They deal with massive volume-supplying infotainment systems to huge OEMs. They automated their CSMS to handle this. They treat the SBOM not as a document, but as a database. When a vulnerability like Log4j hits, they query the database. They don't send emails to engineers asking, hey, did we use this library in that radio from 2024? They know instantly.
That speed is critical when you have 24 hours to report to the EU regulators under the CRA.
Exactly. Compliance speed requires data accessibility. An automated dynamic SBOM provides that.
Finally, let's talk about the delivery mechanism for all these fixes. Secure OTA. Over-the-air updates. We mentioned Uptane. Why is this specific framework so important?
OTA is the only way to fix bugs at scale, but it is also the most dangerous backdoor. If I can hijack your OTA server, I can infect every car you've ever sold. Uptane is the gold standard because it starts with the assumption that the server will be compromised.
That's a pessimistic assumption.
It's a realistic one. Uptane separates duties. It splits the director, the server that says what update to install, from the image repository, the server that holds the binary file, and it requires multi-party signatures.
So let me get this straight. Even if I hack the director server and tell the car download this virus, the car will check the signature with the image repository, and it will say, wait a minute, the signatures don't match. I refuse to install this.
Exactly. It prevents a single compromised server from sending malicious firmware to the fleet. It is the immune system of the connected vehicle.
Wow. We have covered a massive amount of ground. From the 380% surge in attacks to the intricacies of zonal architecture and post-quantum crypto, let's try to synthesize this for our listener, that senior engineers sitting at their desk right now. What is the elevator pitch of this entire report?
The synthesis is this. We are at an inflection point. The strategies that worked in 2023 are obsolete. Strategically, you must acknowledge that security is now a financial and existential pillar of your business, not an IT function. Regionally, you cannot build one car for the world. You need a global core design that can adapt to the regulatory edges of China's data fortress and the EU's audit bureaucracy. Technologically, you must embrace zonal architecture for isolation, prepare for post-quantum cryptography now to save your fleet in 10 years, and use AI to filter the noise. And process-wise, you must automate. Continuous Terra, dynamic SBOMs, virtual fuzzing. If you're still using Excel to manage security, you are already losing.
That is a powerful summary. But I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We've talked about tech, regs, and process, but what about the people, the culture?
That is the final provocative thought, and it might be the most important one. Technology is easy, people are hard. The real challenge for 2026 isn't just installing an HSM, it is a culture shift. We need to move from a culture of compliance, doing it just to avoid a fine, to a culture of engineering pride.
You code it, you own it.
Exactly. When an engineer writes a line of code for a door lock, they shouldn't just think, does it open the door? They should think, can someone else open this door? We need to build a culture where security is a badge of honor, not a burden.
So the question we leave you with is this. Are you building a car that just passes a test? Or are you building a car that can fight back?
Because in 2026, the car will have to fight back.
And on that note, we're signing off. Good luck out there.
You're going to need it.